This is James Long. Jay, it goes by Jay. He is with the Natural Resource Institute, so NRI. But Jay's focus is wild pigs, or is commonly called feral hogs. He's working on his master's, focusing on educating those focusing on education for folks dealing with feral hogs, so literally the entire state. He's going to go into great detail. We're going to spend a little bit of time in the classroom on a lot of different things, and then Jay has very kindly brought some traps and going to talk about some things. We're going to walk out into the arena, and he's going to demonstrate some traps that he's brought with him. So please ask your questions throughout, during, while we're over there. Anything you'd like, that's what we're here for. So I'll turn it over to Jay.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for having me out today. I've done a lot of these programs, and the number one question that I always get asked is, why should I listen to you? So I always start my program with a little bit of a background about who I am and where I came from. I grew up in Illinois. Before anyone gives me any crap, we grow our deer a lot bigger up there than we do down here. So I was raised hunting and fishing. That's all I ever wanted to do. I hated school. So as soon as I got out, I joined the Marine Corps. I spent 10 years in the Marine Corps as an infantryman. While I was in, I got my undergraduate degree in wildlife and fisheries. As soon as I got out, all I wanted to do was hunt and fish again. My wife was pregnant, and she said I had to make some money. And wouldn't you know it, it's hard to make money hunting and fishing. And so I went to work for Texas Parks and Wildlife. I worked at Guadalupe River State Park and at Lake Somerville State Park as a natural resource ranger, and I led their drawn hunt program. Because I'm a glutton for punishment, I decided to pursue my master's degree, which is how I started working on feral pig education for landowners, and that's what brings me here today. I'm going to admit, y'all are going to kind of be my test group. This is the first time we've ever done a QR code for our survey. This survey is different than the one that was handed out. It is solely about the pig program, and it helps us get information together to give to the state and legislature and help get money flowing into the state for pig programs, trap loan programs, things like that. So if I could ask you all to scan that and fill that survey out as I'm speaking, I'd appreciate it. If you do not have a way to scan this, please let me know. We have paper copies. But this is going to be kind of our first test with the QR code and Qualtrics. And so today we're going to go over a bunch of topics. I'm going to try to keep us on time here if I can. I might go about 5 minutes over, but today we are going to touch on distribution and damage, biology and environmental impact. We're going to talk about the laws around feral pigs that help us manage them here in the state, and then we're going to talk about some of our reduction methods. So U.S. distribution. The map on y'all's left is a map from 1982. I know it's kind of hard to see all the small lines on there, but everything in purple are counties that report wild pig populations. If we fast forward to 40 years, the map on y'all's right is from 2023. That is our most current map we have available to us, and we can see how quickly they've taken over really the whole southeastern portion of the U.S. and all of California.
I'm surprised they're going up north.
So they're actually coming down.
Okay.
For our northern states they're actually coming down from Canada. Okay. Or they're, like here in Texas, they are releases from production pig or hobby pig farms. So to bring this home a little bit, this is the exact same map. I just flew it up so we can see Texas a little better. This is the 1982. You can see they're pretty much taking over the entire southern portion of the state and making their way north. Fast forward to 2023, there are only 2 counties in the state of Texas who report not having wild pigs. Can anyone guess what those 2 counties are? El Paso is one of them. So the second one is actually a new addition. It's Dallam. It's right there in the northwest corner of the state. Interesting thing about Guadalupe is that was we were able to take that county off the map through funding from the 2018 Farm Bill that created a pilot control program that mixed trap loan in the counties, so where landowners could borrow smart traps from the county and mix with USDA aerial gunning, their own trapping, and things like that. So we were lucky, NRI was lucky to be a part of that on the education side, where we went through all these counties. There's about 19 counties in total, and we went through and helped landowners get the basics and learn how to use some of these smart traps, which are what we were actually going to get a chance to look at today. So, getting into how many we have in the state, can anyone tell me whose job it is to keep track of wild pig populations? I don't know why everyone says mine. It is not that. Do not put that evil on me. So there is actually no one's job in the state or federal government to track these populations. And why is that? Because they're invasive, exotic animals. So almost all of the information we get as far as population numbers comes from research done by private organizations and universities like Texas A&M. And today, we currently are looking at about 2.6 million wild pigs in the state of Texas. Now, this number came from about 28 different studies that were collated together by Texas A&M and the math people who were really good at pulling out all the statistics and data were able to give us, spit us out a number. But this is through research, so this number is always kind of changing. But 2.6 million is our best number right now. And why is this so important? Why are we so mad at pigs? One of the biggest reasons is because of agricultural damage. So according to Texas A&M, AgriLife Extension, Department of Agricultural Economics, which is a very long title for a group at Texas A&M who are very smart at math and very good at figuring all this out, in 2012 they estimated that wild pigs did about $52 million in damage just to agriculture. Fast forward to 2022, they now conservatively estimate wild pigs doing about $500 million in damage, again, just to agriculture in the state of Texas. So this doesn't include private property, it doesn't include our water systems, it doesn't include our natural resources, our wildlife, anything. This is just agriculture. And then an interesting number is landowners spend roughly about $7 million annually on wild pig control and mitigation. And the reason that number is so interesting is because that number has not changed. So that number is roughly the same as it was in 2012 today. Can anyone guess why that number hasn't increased as the damage has increased? Any guesses? Small properties. That's a good guess. It is not the main reason though. So the main reason is, and I always like to play this video while I explain it. When you have a conversation with landowners, or you send out a survey to landowners, oftentimes they are baking a lot of their costs into the cake. And so the conversation will a lot of times go something like this. Hey, did you spend any money on wild pigs this year? Well, I bought a trap that was $2,000, so I spent $2,000. Well, did you bait the trap? Did you go out to check the trap? How much fuel did it cost you to go out and put it up, to go check it? How much is your time worth? And then something like this on this round bale, when you ask the landowner how much they lost on that round bale, a lot of times what they'll do is they'll tell you how much they could have sold it for and not calculate how much it cost them to make it. And when they lose a round bale like this, they're not only losing that opportunity cost of what they could have sold it for, but they're losing that sunk cost of what it costs to make it. And so with all of those, a lot of times landowners will bake those sunk costs into the cake and not report those when we talk to them. And then I always like to put this picture up here. I don't know if anyone's ever hit a pig with their truck. It's not a fun thing to do. I've done it twice. Luckily, both times with fake trucks. I was only aiming for them the one time, I swear. But I like to put this up here to remind that, again, that $500 million number doesn't include things like insurance costs or vehicle repair costs across the state. And so how did we get here? How did they take over pretty much all of Texas, the entire southern portion of the U.S.? Part of it has to do with their biology. They reach maturity very quickly. A general rule of thumb is going to be 1 year. So at 1 year, a sow and a boar are going to be sexually mature. But we have research that shows us that sows as early as 6 months can reach sexual maturity and go into heat and start putting babies on the ground. They have a very short gestation period. It's 115 days. So that's the period that they're pregnant. The easiest way to remember that is going to be 3 months, 3 weeks, and 3 days. And what that tells us is that if everything's perfect, they have all the food and they're not being harassed, they can put babies on the ground 3 times a year. We also have new research coming out. It hasn't been published yet, but I've had the chance to look at it, showing us that sows can go into heat and get bred while they are still weaning their previous litter, which shortens that time and allows them to put even more babies on the ground. Their litters can be up to 10 to 12 piglets. In wild pigs, we see an average of 4 to 6. They have no defined mating season. What are we going to see here in about a month and a half? Running deer, right? And so we know that they rut in October, November, depending on where you are in the state. And so we know in the spring we're going to have fawns on the ground. We don't see that with pigs. As long as the conditions are right, as long as their basic needs are being met, they can go into heat all year round and be bred all year round. They also have very few predators. What predators do we have here in the state of Texas that will go after pigs?
Mountain lions.
Mountain lions? There's another predator I'm thinking of. Man? So humans is going to be that #1 predator. They are invasive and exotic, meaning they did not evolve here in the United States. What that means is there's no predator that evolved to go after them. While mountain lions will go after them, coyotes will go after piglets, it is actually very rare. We actually have a lot of research on mountain lions showing that they'd actually much prefer to go after deer than pigs. There is some research coming out about alligators going after them. We have research out of Australia about crocodiles going after them, but still that's only a small portion of the state. The biggest predator for these pigs in the U.S. is going to be humans. And then they have easy access to feed meant for wildlife and livestock. What does that mean? So just about anywhere you go, driving in, I drove in this morning from College Station, I saw dozens and dozens of deer feeders in the fields on either side of the highway. I saw round bales out there. I saw feed put out for cattle and livestock. When they have easy access to that feed, they're able to get their body conditioning up, go into that sexual maturity earlier, go into heat more often, put more piglets on the ground, get more piglets to adulthood, and then continue that cycle. And they all need water, which is why Leanne always invites me to these programs. Why do they need water? Why are they so dependent on water? It is for cooling, but why? They don't sweat. So wild pigs lack sweat glands, which means they accomplish their thermoregulation through wallowing, occupying shaded areas, and nocturnal feeding. That nocturnal feeding is the biggest problem for us humans, because in a state like Texas, where it's hot 10 months out of the year, it means they're going to be going nocturnal a little more often. And what do we all like to do at night? Sleep. I much prefer to sleep. I love going after pigs, and I still much prefer to sleep. So this is an example of some of the things they can do to our water system. So this is actually taken off of a co-worker's ranch. Here's some examples of damage to our riparian areas. So as they go through these riparian areas, they don't only destroy the habitat for the species that rely on those riparian areas, they destroy the native grasses and plants, but they also prime those areas for exotic plants and grasses. So an interesting tidbit, when I was working at Lake Somerville State Park, anytime we saw this damage done in riparian areas from pigs, it was about a month, 2 months later, we'd see Chinese tallow. In places we'd never seen it before, places that hadn't reached before, anywhere the pigs destroyed, especially wet areas like that, we'd see that Chinese tallow come up. So some of the other water quality impacts is those loss of riparian areas. We have increased runoff and sedimentation. So as they destroy grasses, as they destroy plants, as they loosen up the compacted soil, the soil loses the anchor points, the roots of the grasses and plants. It gets broken up out of compaction, and it's allowed to slough off. Why is this a problem? Well, in open water systems, like rivers and streams, you've now lost that soil. It's gone. It's all going downstream to the coast. In closed water systems, like stock ponds, or little lakes, or little ponds on your property, all that soil is going to the bottom of that property, which is raising the level of the soil, lowering the level of the water, and creating hotter water if you have fish, creating less oxygen, and all sorts of other problems. They have bacterial contamination that Leanne pointed out, E. coli, and then general watershed impairment. So oftentimes what we see with this is it's not just one thing. So they cause runoff and sedimentation. They destroy the riparian area. They introduce E. coli. It's a cascading effect that they have on our water systems across the state. Some of our wildlife impacts. So pigs are what we call opportunistic omnivores. So while the majority of their diet is going to be, grubs, seeds, things like that, they can eat anything they can put in their mouth, and they'll try to eat things they can. We have pictures of pigs carrying off fawns, carrying off raccoons, possums, turtles. There's research currently being done on their impact on alligator nests. They will eat ground-nesting birds. They'll eat fawn. Normally what we see here is as pigs move into a habitat, first they go after their preferred diet, and after they've ate that out of house and home, they'll start going after some of those other species. They don't only compete, but they outcompete with our native wildlife for the habitat, the food, and the water that the native wildlife need. And the reason they're able to outcompete is because of how quickly they can put new mouths on the ground and keep their population totals up.
Any indication that they go after the invasive snakes in Florida?
I have not seen any research on that. In fact, there's actually research to the opposite, that the mammal populations in Florida are declining because of the snakes. Wild pig and livestock interactions. So when we're speaking about wild pigs and livestock, our biggest concern here is going to be disease. We have research showing us that there's about 65 bacterial, parasitic, and viral infection agents that wild pigs can carry or pass on across the entire U.S. Two of the ones that we're currently most concerned about, number one is African swine fever. Now, African swine fever has not made its way to the U.S. as of yet. However, in 2018-2019, it did destroy about 25% of the global pork production across the U.S. It is a big concern for our production pork industry. And one of the biggest reasons why it's a concern to us in dealing with wild pigs is we have research showing that wild pigs may be asymptomatic with African swine fever. Meaning, we won't be able to readily tell if a wild pig population has had an outbreak. This is especially troubling because of how easy it is to pass African swine fever. It can be passed through ticks, it can be passed through direct contact, like nose to nose, or it can be passed through indirect contact, like a shared feeding area. And so, for those reasons, we are concerned about African swine fever. Researchers have an eye out for it, potentially coming to the U.S. The second one is Chagas disease. Chagas disease has made a resurgence here in the state. It has traditionally been a South American and Central American disease. It's passed by the kissing bug, but we have research showing that pigs are bringing it up from Central America, giving it to the kissing bugs in our state, and then it's allowed to pass on to humans.
Our dog died of that.
Did it really? And so there was a ton of research done a couple of years ago in Texas and Louisiana, and what they found was the number one people to be concerned are going to be Texas hunters because they spend the most time outdoors. They spend the most time outdoors, living and sleeping outdoors. And then some of our more traditional diseases that we're concerned about when we talk about pigs is swine brucellosis. This is an issue because it can cause a false positive for bovine brucellosis, which is obviously a big deal for anyone who depends on cattle operations. Pseudorabies. This can cause neurological symptoms in smaller livestock and pets. This is a big deal when we're talking about our small pets like dogs and cats, and our smaller livestock like sheep and goats. And then any tick-borne diseases. So there's research about a decade ago showing that pigs in the state, 3 out of 4 pigs are potentially infested with ticks that are capable of passing diseases on to humans. Wild pig consumption. So I bombard you with all of the diseases and possible ways you can get sick from pigs to then talk about eating wild pigs. And so interestingly enough, there's been a ton of research done on the consumption of wild pork. It is a pretty hot topic for third world countries as a way to help with food instability. And so what they found in almost all of the research is that the trouble with eating wild pork does not come from the actual consumption of the meat. It comes from what happens from pig in a pasture to pork chop on a plate. And so with that in mind, there's a couple safety things we talk about when we talk about processing and cleaning wild pigs. Obviously, you're going to want to wear double gloves. Anyone here who's a hunter, if you're anything like me, you're not going to get the animal you're after until the last night of the hunt, and you got to be back at work the next morning. And so you're going real fast, trying to clean it, get it in the cooler. You slip and you cut your hand. If you hunt anywhere where there's brush, I can remember searching for deer during hunts at Guadalupe State Park, going through bramble, going through hickory, going through mesquite, and getting micro abrasions, cuts on my arms and legs. Anywhere where we have open wounds, micro abrasions, cuts, when cleaning these animals, that gives a place for blood or fluid to contact your blood, and that's where we see a lot of disease transmission. So we recommend wearing double gloves, wearing long sleeves. Long sleeves will also help with ticks. So if there are ticks on the animal, as they crawl along, instead of crawling directly under your arm, they crawl under your long sleeves. Safety glasses, sanitizing your tools and workstations, even between pigs. So let's say you have 3 pigs you're trying to butcher. As you work through each carcass, cleaning and sanitizing those between carcasses, because one may have a disease and one may not. Washing your hands thoroughly, and the biggest one is going to be, if anyone here fancies himself a chef, like I do, USDA actually recently lowered the internal temperature for production pork to 145. For wild pigs, that is going to stay at 160 to 165. Now, if none of that sounds appealing to you, anywhere you get a deer butchered will usually butcher wild pigs. One note on that is, I do recommend before you ever hunt or get a pig to call that butcher and find out if they have any conditions. For example, there is a butcher in College Station who will not do pigs during deer season. They have enough work during deer season. They don't want to worry about cross-contamination. From the start of deer season to the end of deer season, they will not accept wild pigs. Not every butcher is that way. Every butcher is going to be a little bit different. I will say I never let my freezer not have wild pig in it. It is fairly delicious. The only thing you can't get out of it is bacon. They just don't get fat enough in the stomach to get that nice bacon. So again, the biggest misconception, to kind of close out the disease portion of this, the biggest misconception I see from people is the amount of contact needed for disease transmission. They think there has to be some kind of prolonged contact or something like that, and there doesn't. Especially for our livestock, a lot of these diseases can be passed just through shared feeding areas. So again, we talked about them having access to feed meant for wildlife and livestock. That access can cause a place for disease transmission to concur. So talking about laws, in 2019, Texas removed the requirement for a hunting license for hunting wild pigs. There are two big reasons behind this move. One, can anyone tell me, are pigs wildlife or livestock? They're livestock. They're classified as exotic livestock. Basically what that does within Texas law is it means when they come onto your property, you own them. And it allows you to trap them, sell them, other things we'll get into here in a little bit. But between that and before they removed the hunting license requirement, there was an exception in the rule. If wild pigs were actively depredating on your crops or wildlife or livestock, you were allowed to shoot them without a hunting license. Well, that kind of became a gray area because there's an argument to be made that the pigs just being on your property is depredation. And so because of those two reasons, they did remove the hunting license requirement for anyone born after 1971. Something to note though, even with the removal of the hunting license requirement, you still have to have hunter safety. So this is my pig hunting machine that the state has so kindly bought me. Ammo is very expensive right now, so we're going to be passing around a collection plate at the end of this. I do need to restock. So, what are our legal options? In the state of Texas, we have 7 legal options. Can anyone tell me, of those 7, what are the 2 that have been scientifically proven to actually reduce wild pig populations? Aerial gunning and trapping. And what we mean by that is, if you were to only aerial gun, you would reduce population. If you were to only trap, you would reduce population. All of the others require a combination of methods to actually reduce population, and toxicants we do not have enough research on yet. And so, one thing that's important to note, it's not talked about a whole lot. Mostly all of the pig talks you'll get are going to be, we need to get rid of everyone we can. That needs to be our focus. But while that is true, while we do need to get rid of them, as many of them as we can, another focus is reducing damage done across the state to agricultural entities. And so not every method, not every landowner is going to be able to do a method that can actually reduce population. You may need to focus first on how can you deter pigs from your property. And then as you get time or as you get funds, you can move to a removal option. With that in mind, I always start with fencing. So we have, there's 2 types of fencing we talk about. The first is going to be exclusion fencing. This is going to be your mesh, your hog panels, your high fencing. There are a couple of cons to exclusion fencing. The first being that it can be cost prohibitive. So it is expensive to put up every foot of hog-proof fence. The second one is it's permanent. Once you put that up, you're not going to be moving it around. So if you put it up around one pasture and then next year you decide to farm the pasture over, you're not going to be able to move that exclusion fencing over. You're either going to have to put new fencing up or just allow it to be damaged. And then the third one is that while good fencing can be 100% effective in keeping pigs out, it also requires regular upkeep. So it's not just the cost of putting the fencing up, there is a cost to upkeep because no fencing is going to be 100% effective 100% of the time if you just put it up and leave it. So between weather events, yes ma'am.
What's the recommended height?
So I go 5 feet. It's going to be anything under 5 feet. I've seen pigs go over. Now, with that being said, we're going to talk about an exclusion fencing for feed here in a minute. There is a big difference for pigs in getting out of a trap and then trying to get into somewhere. So if you're the only property in your area putting up fencing, you probably are going to have much better luck than if everyone's putting up fencing. Because the pigs are going to, it's much easier for the pigs to go to your neighbor than it is to try to hop your fence. But again, none of this fencing is worth it unless you do the consistent upkeep. And oftentimes what we see is it's that upkeep that is actually causing pigs to get in. It's so expensive to put it up in the first place. Most landowners don't have the time or the money to do consistent upkeep and checking. And so then between weather, rain, floods, trees going down, and the pigs testing the fence, the pigs are going to test the fence and try to find places to get in. Eventually that fence breaks, you have a hole in it, and now it's no longer effective. The second type of fencing we talk about is a hot wire fence. So there's been a couple studies done on these and a couple of applications put out. In the biggest study they did, they studied 2 or 3 strand hot wire fence. They found it to be roughly about 75% effective at keeping hogs out. Now, a couple of interesting things about this is first, they set that lower strand at 20 centimeters. 20 centimeters is going to be high enough that piglets and juveniles can still get underneath it. However, it is high enough that you do not have to do as consistent of upkeeping for the hot wire. So what they did was they said, okay, I'm going to let some of my juveniles in, but I don't have to go out there every week during the growing season and weed eat it or spray it and upkeep it. What they also found is that once an adult pig hit it, juveniles and piglets who had already successfully gone under the fence stopped going under the fence because they saw the adult pig get shocked. And then the third thing they found is that after 2 months of having it hot, they were able to turn it off, take the power off of it, and the pigs still did not try to go through it for about 2 months afterwards. So they learned a lesson. One of the nice things about this is it's not as expensive to put up hot fence as it is to put up exclusion fencing, and it is movable. So if you change pastures, if you change fields, it's a lot easier to move it. And again, it's not 100% effective, but it's 75% effective depending on what crop you're growing or what you're trying to do on your property. It may be worth it to reduce 75% of the pig incursions and save some money on crop damage. And then exclusion fencing. So exclusion fencing for feed that's meant for wildlife and livestock. It's a 28-inch high fence. They found in studies that at 28 inches, it'll keep the pigs out. It'll let the fawns go over. The easiest way to do this is to get a 5-foot cattle panel, cut it in half, take the cut side, put it into the ground, and then with T-posts. Now, for wildlife, you can do a full circle and completely fence off the feeder. For livestock, you still need to let the livestock get in. So the best way we found is instead of connecting the circle at the end, you leave it open a little bit so that livestock can squeeze in. Now, pigs will still be able to get in. Obviously, pigs can squeeze in just like the livestock can. However, oftentimes what we found was when they hit the fence, they go to the next feeder down the road. So it's not 100% effective, but it'll still help reduce shared feeding areas. Snaring. So snaring is another tool in our toolbox to help deter pigs. One of the things that we haven't touched on yet is that wild pigs are very smart. They're one of the smartest animals we have on the landscape currently. So they do learn. And by utilizing multiple methods, we can teach pigs that, hey, you might not want to be on my property. And so with snaring, it's easy and a quick setup. It's relatively inexpensive. Most farm and ranch stores are going to have snares already set up for you to purchase. Now there are 2 problems with snares. Who can guess what the 2 problems are? Catching other animals. And how many pigs are you catching with that snare? Just one at a time. So again, our main goal is complete reduction of pigs on a property. Catching one at a time is not necessarily the best way to do that. However, again, pigs are smart. You can use snares to help deter pigs out of areas for short periods of time. On the bycatch issue, I always recommend that if you're going to put snaring into your toolbox, have a hunting license. That way, if you do catch another animal, you are covered. It is an awkward conversation with a game warden when you catch a fox or a coyote and you don't have a hunting license. Second thing, yes ma'am?
Do wild pigs have a lead animal? In other words, are they?
So in the sounders, there will usually be the lead sow, and then there'll be a couple younger sows, maybe a couple younger boars, depending on their age and their area and how much resources they have available to them. And then there's usually a main boar that controls a big area.
So, I mean, if you knew who they were or what they were, if you got rid of the head sow and the head, it didn't make.
No, ma'am. Now, another one will just fill its spot. So, has anyone ever seen pigs rubbing up against telephone poles? It's a uniquely pig thing to do. They love the creosote. It kills all the mites and bugs on their hide. So setting up a snare near a telephone pole that has rub marks on it, setting up a snare along a fence line where you have proof of pigs going under the fence. These are ways we can help reduce bycatch. Shooting. Everyone hates when I say this. Shooting is considered a low harvest method. It is my favorite way to deal with pigs. Now there are two types of shooting we talk about. We talk about regular shooting, which is what most landowners are going to do, which is I shoot at pigs as I see them when I'm driving through on the gator. I shoot at pigs that are under my deer feeder while I'm out hunting. Maybe I shoot at a couple pigs while I'm out working on fence work. But overall, that's all the shooting I'm doing. The second type of shooting we talk about, we actually see a lot on the Red River. And this is where we get a bunch of landowners who have 10, 20, 30,000 acres of property. They all agree. They all open it up. They have all the bells and whistles and the toys. They have UTVs, thermal drones, thermals on their guns, suppressors, and they go out one night and they hunt the pigs down. And in that case, they're taking 200-300 pigs in a night. That is population reduction. However, for the most part, many landowners, one, don't have the access to that much land to just run around on. Don't have the time, don't have the toys. And so for the most part, we look at shooting as a low harvest method here in the state of Texas. Now it is effective at pressuring hogs. Again, hogs are smart. If you keep shooting at them day in, day out, eventually they're gonna move on for a little bit, 2 to 3 weeks, and they'll come back and check and see if you've given up yet. And then you can increase your success through the use of all those bells and whistles, through suppressors, thermals, night vision. It helps increase the success of shooting. So for trained dogs has historically been a pretty great way of hunting pigs, especially here in Texas. I've worked with several gentlemen whose family did it for generations. What we've seen recently, as Texas changes, as more people move into Texas, as we start seeing a reduction in our large size ranches and farms into more small acreage property ownership, we start seeing trained dogs become more of a guided hunt situation. Basically what it looks like is, I'm a hunter, I've never done this before, I pay you to take me out. Because I've never done it before, I slow the whole process down. We only shoot 1 or 2 pigs in a night. Now, gentlemen that have done this for generations, I've seen them take 30 or 40 pigs in a night, but they're all people that have done this for generations. They all have very well-trained dogs, and they move at a very fast pace. Unfortunately, we do not see that quite as often. It's kind of a dying out tradition here in the state of Texas. Aerial gunning. Aerial gunning may be one of the most effective ways at reducing pig populations across the state. There are some issues with aerial gunning. It's not going to be right for everyone. If you live inside a city center or right next to a city center, it's probably not going to be right for you. If you only have 10 or 15 acres, it's probably not going to be right for you unless you can get your neighbors to sign on as well. It's also very expensive. Currently, I don't know of any grant money out there paying for aerial gunning to be done. Most of it is run out of the 2018 Farm Bill, and we're waiting for the new Farm Bill to be signed to get more money into the state. And even then, they don't do it in every county all year long. They kind of pick counties as they see a need for it. There is another way to get this done. If you have large enough property and you're far enough out of the city center, a lot of times you can find outfitters who will pay you to allow them to use your property to aerial gun. Here's the thing I'll say about that. It's a great way to get it done on your property for free or low cost. When USDA does aerial gunning, they use jet helicopters. They get very low, they go very slow, and they're shooting them with shotguns. They're very good at what they do. We had USDA, when I was the trailway manager out at Lake Somerville State Park, it was about 3,200 acres. We had USDA come out, fly for 8 hours. They killed about 330 pigs. When an outfitter is doing this, more often than not, they're flying higher than USDA flies, and they're using high-powered rifles. And you as the landowner, once you go into that agreement, you usually will not have the option to say no to somebody. So the outfitter gets someone who pays them to let them go up in a helicopter. You don't know who that is, and they're shooting high-powered rifles. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I know plenty of landowners who do it, and it's been very effective for them. But it's also always something I want to kind of put out there as something to think about when you think about going that route. This is USDA. This is actually a USDA helicopter. Again, like I said, they get very low. They use shotguns. They're usually pretty good at what they do. So, toxicants. I always start my toxicant talk with, I promise I'll try to answer every question you have. I promise I won't have answers to all of your questions. Toxicants are still very new in the state. There are some things we just don't have questions for. And then also, I do work for Texas A&M AgriLife. I am an educational entity, not a regulatory entity. So some of those things I don't have answers for. For toxicants, kaput feral hog bait is a warfarin-based toxicant. It's the only toxicant for pigs currently legal in Texas. If anyone remembers this from several years back, it was given an emergency authorization, and then it was fairly quickly pulled off the shelf after lawsuits. Because of those lawsuits, the 87th legislature directed Texas A&M AgriLife Extension to do a 2-year study to figure out if kaput would be effective, and what they found was that it is effective. Just like any other herbicide or pesticide, label is the law. A couple things to know about the label. It was given a label by EPA in 2017. It did not get a label in Texas until February of 2024, so February of this year. It did not become really commercially available until about April or May. You are required to have a state applicator license in order to use it. You're also required to do a secondary training given by the manufacturer. AgriLife Extension will not be offering that training because it's not required by the state. The way that looks is you'll go to whoever you're going to be purchasing this from. You'll ask them. They'll give you a card that has a QR code on it, or they'll give you a website. You'll go to that website. You'll go through a PowerPoint slideshow, which is much like what I'm going to be giving to you, and then you'll answer some questions on a test. Once you've done that and passed, they'll send you a completion certificate, and they'll put your name on a list for all of their distributors, so that when you go in, it's like any other pesticide you have to give your applicator's license for. Bless you.
Thank you.
They are not currently publicly releasing distributors like online or anything like that. So if you want to know where to buy it, your first step would be go to whoever you currently purchase herbicides and pesticides from and ask them if they're carrying it. If they're not carrying it, you can go to Kaput's website. You're going to have to call them, and they will tell you your closest distributor to you. They haven't told us why they're not giving it out publicly. The only thing I can think of is trying to avoid any blowback. couple other things about the label. This is only for use on pigs. So there are herbicides and pesticides out there that have been around long enough that some of them have off-label uses. This does not. It is only for use on pigs. Do not put the bait in water. So areas that are readily flooded, tidal zones, anything like that. This bait can mildew and mold. And believe it or not, if it mildews or molds, pigs will not eat it. I know it's hard to believe. I've seen pigs eat some pretty nasty stuff. But for whatever reason, they have an aversion to this once it's molded. It must be distributed using an approved feeder. I will get into the approved feeder in a couple other slides. And then surveillance is required. This is the biggest one that I like to pound home because surveillance is required on the label, meaning you're going out to the bait site every 2 or 3 days. What they prefer to see is game cameras put up at the bait site. But it's not only required by the label. What we found in the Texas study is that it's required for proper success. So, a couple other things about the label. It's approved for pastures, rangelands, forests, and non-crop areas. I'm going to tell you, non-crop areas does not have a black and white definition in the state of Texas. If you want to know what non-crop area means, call your TDA inspector. What I have been told by TDA inspectors over the last 3 months I've been doing this talk is that to them it means no area that has currently growing crops for human consumption. But again, I highly suggest if you have any questions or you think there might be a gray area, before you put a bait site out, call your TDA inspector and ask them. You're not allowed to, you do not allow livestock to graze in baiting area. What they prefer to see is that you move the livestock out of the pasture that you're currently baiting in. If you cannot do that, either because of the size of your property or the way your grazing system is set up, you will have to build some kind of enclosure around the bait site that only allows pigs in and doesn't allow your livestock into it. And then on the label, you do have to properly dispose of carcasses that you find. There is no requirement to locate every carcass that is poisoned. And you have to dispose of them according to state laws with their status as a free-ranging livestock. If you have questions or concerns about that, TDA is going to be your friend, or Texas Animal Health Commission. I can tell you in the study, they put the carcasses in the bone pile on the ranches. So, some human considerations. It is harmful if consumed. In case anyone didn't know, warfarin is a pretty common and pretty old drug. It's actually prescribed to humans. It is a blood thinner. This is still harmful to humans if consumed. Don't eat it. Store it safely. If you do consume it, call poison control. It can be treated. Yes. So, just like any other herbicide or pesticide, when you are using this, use your basic personal protective equipment, long sleeves, pants, gloves, closed-toed shoes. I will tell you, I talked to the owner of this company. He did say if you get that dye on your skin, that dye is going to last about 2 to 3 weeks. So use gloves when you're dealing with it, unless you want to have blue hands for 2 to 3 weeks. So, non-target species considerations. Basically what this means is, how does this work on any other animal other than pigs? First off, the primary toxicity. So the way this bait poisons is through consumption. If you follow the label, no other animal besides pigs should be able to consume the bait. Kaput feral hog bait is a low toxicity bait. It's been specifically designed as a low toxicity bait, meaning that it is not going to kill the pig on first consumption. It takes 5 to 6 days of consumption for it to kill the pig. They specifically designed it as a low toxicity bait to help prevent any problems with non-target animals. Through now the Texas study, Texas A&M AgriLife Extension did not have the purview or the money to study its effects on other animals. So all the information we have on this is done by other studies and studies on warfarin. But what they found is, for a dog, they would have to eat 88 pounds of the bait in a single feeding, or eat 13.2 pounds a day for 5 days to get a toxic dose. A cow would have to eat 3,520 pounds of bait for 5 days to get a toxic dose. A turkey would have to eat 29.3 pounds of bait every day for 19 days. And a bobwhite quail would have to eat 27.6 pounds of the bait to be toxic. Yes, ma'am.
How much does the pig have to eat per day?
So an 88-pound pig has to eat 3/4 of a pound a day, every day for 5 days. So obviously, as the pig gets bigger, you scale that up. As the pig gets smaller, it becomes less. So roughly like a 100-pound pig would have to eat probably about a pound a day.
This shows a sampling, but what about all the other wildlife that's out there and vulnerable to it?
Almost all the other wildlife are going to be about the same as this. Again, they did this as a low toxicity bait to help prevent if an accident was to occur, an animal getting into it. So some considerations continue. Secondary toxicity. So secondary toxicity, meaning I've now killed pigs with the bait, an animal comes along and eats that pig. What could happen? Well, this warfarin quickly metabolizes. It goes through the system fairly fast. Again, it's not an acute toxicant, so it does require regular consumption to keep the levels high to continue to do its work. What they found was scavengers should be safe. Now, what they did find was a lethal dose for a dog. A 20-pound dog would have to consume 136 pounds of infected liver in order to get a toxic dose. The reason they specify liver is because obviously liver is one of the organs that helps cleanse out our blood and our system. So in fact, a liver would hold the highest dose of this poison in it. They fed warfarin at 10 times the dose that is in the bait to rats. It killed the rats. They fed those rats to magpies. It had no effect on the magpies. They, again, 10 times the dose that's currently in the bait was killed prairie dogs. They fed those prairie dogs to European ferrets, had no effects on the European ferrets. And then warfarin at 5 times the dose was fed to rats, killed the rats. They fed those rats to alligators, had no effects on the alligators. So theoretically, if you do all of this, if you go by the label, which means no other animal is able to get access to the bait, and then the pigs are killed, there should not be enough out on the landscape for it to have effect on other animals. They did put a safety thing in here. So we'll get into it a little bit with the Texas study. However, on the Texas study, you had to have at least 5,000 acres in order to qualify for the Texas study. The reason being is they wanted to try to help ensure that the pigs didn't die on someone else's property, because pigs have fairly high home ranges, and depending on the season and the resources available to them, they may move around properties. So they did put a safety in there. They have a blue dye in the toxic bait. That blue dye will start dyeing the fat of the pig as soon as 3 hours after first consumption. And it will stay in the fat and the fluid in the joints for up to 2 to 3 weeks after last consumption. It is important to note that according to the Texas study, they did not find any pigs who consumed the bait and did not die from the bait. Basically the way they did that was they went out, they baited a site, they went through a toxic cycle. According to their trail cameras, they got the entire sounder of pigs. And then about a week or two later, they went through an aerial gun to the ranches, and they didn't shoot a single live pig that was dyed blue. I can tell you this dye is pretty prevalent. You can see it even in a live pig through the back, like in their kind of thinner skin areas. So back of the ear, around their mouth, on their knees and joints. You can see it come through the skin. So the Texas study, They studied multiple regions. They had 23 sites over 10 counties. Their goal was to do at least one site in every ecoregion and to test it throughout the seasons to see when or where it may be most effective. I will tell you, they did not have any sites in areas with bears. If you have property where bears may be able to get on your property, I promise you they can get into the pig-specific feeders. They purposely did not test this in area with bears. But for this study, the landowners were the applicators. AgriLife Extension, all we did was advise them on how to use it and collect the data as they did. What we found was that it works, but only if you follow the protocol exactly. So that feeder, that specific feeder we were talking about, bait cannot be placed on open ground. You must use a hog-specific feeder. Now, you do not have to buy a specific feeder. You do not have to buy the feeder the kaput sells. You can make your own feeder if you want to. The two things is you have to have at minimum a 17-pound weighted door so that only a pig can open it up, obviously excluding a bear. And it must be capable of being put at half stop. So this feeder right here is set at half stop. There's a pin right here keeping that door halfway open. And that's for use during the conditioning phase. I will tell you, they tried several different feeders in the study. They found the most effective feeder, the one that was quickest to have pigs using it and most reliant on having pigs using it, was the feeder made by Kaput. That's obviously only one study, but it is what they found in the Texas study. Again, you do not have to purchase that specific feeder. You can make your own 17-pound door, half stop. So the pre-baiting. Pre-baiting is going to be the number one most important thing in this whole process. If you do not properly pre-bait, you will not be successful in using this toxic bait. What you're going to start with is bait with 100% corn for 1 week with feeder door fully open. When we say 1 week, we do not mean just 1 week and then we move on to the next phase. We mean 1 week of a sounder of pigs actively eating out of the feeder. So this is where that surveillance comes from. You're going to be required to do surveillance so that you know when the pigs are actively using the feeder and going through these conditioning steps. So for the first step, you want a full week of the entire sounder of pigs actively eating from the feeder. After that, you're going to go to 75% corn and 25% placebo for 1 week with the feeder door half open. Now, placebo might not always be available. You do not have to use the placebo by the label. It is recommended to use because it gets the pigs used to the smell, the feel, and eating the pellets. However, it is not a requirement if you cannot get your hands on it. But again, at this second step, we want another full week of the pigs actively using the feeder. From there, you're going to go to the third step, which is bait with corn for 50% corn and 50% placebo for 1 week with the feeder door at half open. Again, you're looking for another full week of them actively using it. From there, you're going to go to the last step for pre-baiting, which is 50% corn and 50% placebo for 1 week with the feeder door closed all the way. What we're looking for in this pre-baiting is we're looking for the pigs regularly at the feeder. We're looking for that feeder regularly being emptied because they're eating out of it. What they found in the study was that the best preconditioned pigs were basically living at the feeder. The landowner was coming up and there'd be a sounder just laying there waiting for the dinner bell. What they also found was that during this preconditioning phase, you cannot allow that feeder to go empty. If you allow that feeder to go empty, it can cause the sounder to move on to another feed source, and you may have to restart the entire preconditioning. That's another reason why surveillance is so important in the operation of this bait. I will tell you that even if things go perfect, and the pigs just cooperate at every step, you're still looking at a 4 to 5 week preconditioning phase. Realistically, you're looking at probably close to 8 weeks of preconditioning to meet all of these wickets. Once you've done that, so the sounder's readily eating there, they're eating there every day, they're actively opening that door, you can go to the toxic bait. With that, you're going to remove all of the non-toxic bait out of the feeder. You're going to put toxic bait in, keep the door closed. You want to fill it, keep it 100% full for at least 3 weeks, or until you no longer see pigs eating at the feeder. So there's no longer feed missing when you go to check it. You no longer have pigs on camera. You no longer see pigs hanging out at the feeder. Once feeder use stops, you can go into the post-baiting phase. With post-baiting, what this does is it allows us to get an idea if we got every pig in the sounder. So you're going to take out all the toxic bait. You're going to go in with 100% corn for 10 days. Again, this is where surveillance comes in, is important. And you want to watch that feeder and see if there are still pigs actively using the feeder door. If you still have pigs that are actively opening that feeder door and eating, you may have missed a couple pigs in that original sounder. If you do see pigs coming in, but they're not eating out of the feeder, then you may have another sounder that's coming in, and you may have to start the whole process over. So when did it work and when did it fail? When it worked was when landowners invested the appropriate time in pre-baiting. If you put the time and effort into the pre-baiting, this will be effective for you. Part of that is you can never allow the feeders to go empty, either during preconditioning or during the baiting. If you allow them to go empty, you run the risk of the sounder moving on to another food source. Checking the feeder every 2 to 4 days, or even more in the earlier process. Use of game cameras to help with that surveillance. And the number one most important thing to do to make sure that this works is do not harass the pigs at the bait site. They had a case in the study where they had to end that study site early because the landowner got tired of seeing pigs camped out at his feeder every other day when he was going to fill it up. He decided to start taking pot shots at them. I think he killed 3 or 4 of them. They never saw the pigs at the feeder again. They had to end the whole bait site study. If you put the time and effort into pre-baiting these pigs, do not go out there and start harassing them. You'll have just wasted all of that time and effort. When it failed was abundant alternate feed. So I know Leanne talked about there still being a drought on, but a lot of Texas got a lot of rain this spring. We were very green in a lot of parts of the state. We had a pretty good growing crop in a lot of parts of the state. When there's all of that abundant food out on the landscape, you are going to have a harder time getting pigs to come into bait sites. When there's inconsistent baiting, again, if you allow that feeder to go empty, even for a day, it can cause you to have issues with the pre-baiting or the toxic bait. Lack of conditioning. We did have landowners in the study who kind of got fed up with the long process. 5 to 8 weeks, that's a long time to just be feeding pigs. And they tried to rush the process, go directly into toxic baiting. It was not successful. And then again, harassing feral pigs at the site. I cannot stress this enough. Do not harass feral pigs at the bait site. Some additional considerations. Weather. So bait stored in the high heat, it does have a tendency to melt a little bit. If it does melt, it's still perfectly fine. Chip it back into blocks. You can put it into the feeder. If it is allowed to get wet, either through heavy rainfall, flooding, anything like that, and it gets moldy, again, the pigs won't eat it. You're going to have to remove it and get rid of it. Feeder maintenance. No matter which feeder you choose, no feeder is going to last forever, especially in Texas weather, and especially since we're targeting pigs. Feeder maintenance is going to be your most important thing. They actually did have a case in the study where a feeder door got stuck open by a pig. A raccoon was allowed to get to some of the feed. Because they did proper surveillance, they were able to fix that feeder door the same day, and they saw the pig or they saw the raccoon in follow-on pictures. The raccoon did not die. Again, another reason why surveillance is so important and is on the label. So with trapping, some of the advantages. It is highly effective. Again, we have proven through research that with trapping, by only doing trapping effectively, we can reduce population numbers. Our goal with trapping is to catch the whole sounder. You can transport and sell the live pigs if you want to make some money back on whatever you're doing for pigs. And you can combine it with all of the other methods. Some of the disadvantage, there is a time cost and there is a material cost. Now, one of the things I always talk about is you can lower your time cost by increasing your material cost, or you can lower your material cost by increasing your time cost. It all depends on what fits your ranch and your lifestyle the best. Here's my examples on this. I actively run traps so that I can shoot videos for landowners. We put it on our YouTube page to show them how to do trapping, tips, tricks, things like that. Because I do so many of these programs, I drove 4 hours this morning to get here from College Station. I'm going to drive 4 hours to get home today. I don't have a lot of time to go out and bait and check cameras. So I purchased a deer feeder. That deer feeder does all of my baiting for me. That is an increase in material cost, but it decreased my time cost. I also have purchased cell cameras that send pictures and videos to my phone. Those cameras tend to be more expensive than your regular game cameras. They also have a monthly fee. However, because I purchased that camera, I don't have to go out every day or every 2 days or every 3 days to pull an SD card, put it on my computer, check it. The pictures come straight to my phone. I know what's going on every day. So those are some of the examples. You can decrease your time cost if you're willing to spend a little more money, or if maybe money is the thing you're worried about and time isn't, you can lower your material cost by putting more time into it. The two number one things to be successful with trapping is pre-baiting and cameras. For pre-baiting, we're trying to train the pigs to come to the bait, not necessarily the trap. Here's what I tell landowners. You're going to have to take a good hard look at your property. You want to find places that the pigs are actively using, whether it be wallowing, game trails, something like that, and you want to start baiting and you want to put a camera up. My general rule of thumb, what I have found has worked the best, is if you picked a good spot, so a spot the pigs were already actively using, you start baiting, and you have the entire sounder coming to that bait in less than 7 days, you are probably okay to build a trap in 1 day. Go out there, put the trap up, and start conditioning them to the trap. If it takes you more than 7 days to get pigs to come to bait, what I mean by that is, I picked a good spot, pigs were already using it. All I did was put out free food, and they got skittish. You're going to want to build that trap over several days. Again, these pigs are smart. If they see a big metal trap or a net or whatever you choose to do, just appear overnight, and they were already skittish, you're going to spook them. And that's the biggest thing I see with landowners is they try to put the trap up too fast because they don't have enough time. The pigs stop coming the moment they put the trap up, and now they're frustrated and they feel defeated and they give up on trapping altogether. And it's usually a battle with them to talk them back into trapping. I gotta be like, hey, I'll work with you, we'll find a place, I'll walk you through this process. I understand that frustration. I've had pigs actively coming to corn for 10 days before I could get out there and put up a trap, and then I don't see pigs for 2 weeks. I've had it happen to me. It's never going to be perfect, but we can kind of lower the chance of that frustration by following some of these general rules. Again, the cameras are important because we want to know when the pigs are coming, how many of them coming, are they coming every day? With that, we'll get into the types of traps. We talk about animal-activated traps, human-activated traps, and continuous traps.
Human traps.
Our first one's going to be animal-activated traps. The pros to this is they're cheaper to build. Almost every landowner, rancher, farmer has almost everything you need to build a animal-activated trap. laying around from previous projects. It's T-post, cattle panel, something to make a trigger out of, and a head gate. And it has less operational costs. You don't have to use a feeder in it. You can just put corn in there. You don't have to use a cell camera. You can just get a regular game camera. You don't necessarily have to have any real additional operational costs. The cons, the downsides to it. Because it is animal activated, because you are relying on the animals, even if you do everything 100% correctly, it does not guarantee you'll be successful in trapping the whole sounder. All it takes is for one sow, one boar to be extra hungry that day and run straight to the trigger and trip it. I've seen raccoons trip him. I've seen deer trip him. Because there's an animal needed in this situation, even if you do it all right, you may not be effective. And then the effort to build the trap is higher. I don't know about anyone else here. I'm not a big fan of pounding T-posts anymore. It's not a fun thing to do. So this is what I'm talking about. This is a traditional animal activated trap. It's a corral trap. It's cattle panel and T-post. This rancher, he used 2x4s and plywood to build a head gate. There's a wire that runs to this tire. He used the tire as a trigger. When we're building something like this, a couple of things we want to look for. We want that trigger, whatever you choose it to be set in the back 1/3 of the trap. That allows the most time for the animals, all the animals, to get in before they trigger it. What I also like to do is I put a T-post about halfway and I run the wire to that T-post and then run it down to the trigger. The reason I do that is, especially the larger you build that trap, the more of an angle you'll have. If you have a bigger sow or a bigger boar run straight at it, their backs may hit that wire before they even get to the trigger, and depending on how heavy or light you set it, they could wind up setting the trap off before they even get to the trigger. Something else you want to look at is size of pigs to size of triggers. If you have 50 to 60 pound pigs coming in, you probably don't want to use a tractor tire. If you have 100 to 150 pound pigs coming in, you probably don't want to use a 4-wheeler tire. You want to make sure that it's appropriate so that it's not super easy for them to move, but also not impossible for them to move. And then box traps. Box traps can be great. They can be very useful. The issue we have with this is, are you catching the whole sounder in a box trap? The more trapping we put out onto the landscape where we don't catch the whole sounder, the better chance we have of educating the pigs to traps. Also, if you never caught a deer in a box trap, I promise you it's not a fun day for you or the deer. Human activated traps. So these are going to be Jaeger Pro, Hog Eye, things like that. Some of the pros is it gives the user the flexibility to trap on their schedule. So you have a camera that's sending pictures and video to your phone. You know exactly when the pigs are coming in, exactly how long they're staying. You can pattern them, and you can trap them when it's best suited to you. It allows for a better chance of catching the whole sounder because you're the one activating that trap door. It means that you can wait. If you know there's 20 pigs in that sounder, you can sit there and watch the camera, wait till 20 pigs come in, and then close the door. The cons. It's not tends to be more expensive. They just straight are more expensive. The average for a human activated trap, you're looking anywhere from $4,000 to $8,000.
Yeah, but think about the land that they're tearing up too.
But not every landowner has that disposable income.
That's true.
And then they usually have some kind of monthly charge. So they do have a camera that they use to operate. They usually have some kind of data plan you have to pay for that camera. This is a Jaeger Pro that we had for the that farm bill project I told you all about. We got a Jaeger Pro and a pig brig so that we could learn how to use them, kind of learn the tricks, and then go out and teach landowners on it. This is what a live video looks like from it. And this is us actually dropping on one. And then continuous traps. The best example of this is going to be a pig brig. It is a net trap. What we mean by continuous trap is You put that net down in trap mode, it's going to allow pigs to go into the trap all night long until you come out and deal with them. What that means is, and the reason that's so important, is sometimes, depending on where you are, what your property looks like, you may not have a great idea of exactly how big that sounder is. Or sometimes you may have a lone boar that's traveling an hour or 2 hours behind the sounder with an animal activated trap or a human activated trap. Once you close that trap door, your trapping is done for the night. With this style of trap, again, it lets the pigs go under the net all night long, but then they can't get out. It's less expensive than human activated traps. It's easier to get to hard to reach areas of landscape. I'm going to show you my setup out there. I have the whole thing in a 55-gallon tote, minus the T-posts. You can put that on the back of any four-wheeler, any UTV, and get it to places you just can't get these other traps with the hard panels or the cattle panels. You can't drag it out there with a trailer. I even do know, talking with some of the representatives from Pig Brig, is that they have people that will pack these into places. So they do have a setup where they do have a way to set it up where you don't even have to have T-posts. I'll have Randy talk more about that here in a minute. But it is a much easier, much more versatile trap to get into places. And then again, like I said, it allows for trapping all night. I know he's going to disagree with me, but the cons that I see from it is, one, it is still more expensive than an animal activated trap, and it is harder to load pigs out of. And by harder, what I really mean is you're going to have to build some other kind of contraption, bring some panels with you to make a hard wall if you do want a live load. Where some of these other traps, you can build them in a way where you can pretty much just back a trailer up to. I do apologize, sir. I have not had a chance to put those videos in my program yet. But this is what a setup pig brig looks like. Here's one with pigs under it. And then with that, we are going to go outside to the arena and do the actual trap demonstration.